Hello, everyone. How are we doing? So I actually had lobster for lunch, so that's going to be a pretty big embarrassment, but thank you. Excellent. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction. My name's Ross Mason. I founded the Mule project back in 2003. So for me, open source has been an interesting ride. It was pretty early back then. You had the Apache Foundation, you had SourceForge, and then not much in between. And now, obviously, we're hearing stories from big and small organizations about how good I think we've become as citizens of open source and how much more infrastructure is available. And you know, from that project, I started the company Mulesoft. And what we do is we essentially help enterprises unlock the value of their data, applications, and devices. And we connect it to unlock it, and then they can realize value from it. And it sort of dovetails into a much broader trend that's really happening in the market, in my mind, around this notion of a second digital revolution. So I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes making the case for that and helping you look at what's changed quite dramatically over the last even 2 or 3 years. And you know, the situation is when you think about revolutions, there's actually 2 revolutions. The first revolution sort of changes the way you work or communicate, the way you live, essentially. But the second revolution actually changes the way you think. And this is what I think is happening today. You know, what I've seen so far is the digital revolution has been pretty transformative. The internet in itself has connected the world and really given us a very powerful network. I think we're only now even beginning to really understand what we could do with that network. And that's what the second digital revolution is about. You know, we're making connections digitally in ways we couldn't do even 6 months ago. It's amazing how quick the pace of innovation is happening. And those connections are really driving foundational thinking. They're changing the way we're thinking about how to offer products and services. But the interesting thing is it's also driving decentralization. And that's a key piece of this talk today. So our lives are going to change. They're going to change very dramatically and probably in ways we can't even think about today. Just in the same way 10 years ago, if you told someone about smartphones, we probably had a hard time digesting how far that really went. And you know, I think my ask for today's session is, while you sit there for the next 30 minutes, is just reflect on some of the great innovation that's happening. This is the point of this session, is just to highlight some things that are happening, but also get inspired by it. Think about how you can take those ideas and adapt them and create your own dent, create your own innovation and drive value in the marketplace. And I think by doing so, you'll help shape the new world that I think we're slowly building on top of this network, the internet, and that's going to power the second digital revolution. So sorry to be a bit boring. I'm going to give you a very quick history lesson. I know a lot of you love history. I'm going to do this very quickly. So this is a graph of GDP in the US over the last 200 years. And it's a good measure of economic growth and innovation in an economy. And the Industrial Revolution is hailed as the thing that broke us out of this very long-term subsistence living. So if I go back 10,000 years beyond that first point on this graph, it's flat all the way. So for 10,000 years, there wasn't much in the way of growth or development or innovation. We did do things like domesticate animals, things like that, but it wasn't making a big impact. And it wasn't until some few key inventions occurred. So things like the steam engine was one of the foundational pieces of the Industrial Revolution. It allowed us to harness power in a new way. Before the steam engine, we're using horses and mules, which is interesting, a little tie back. But what really drove it was something called the cotton gin. And the reason why this was important, not because it suddenly made us more productive at processing cotton, spinning it and sorting it and things like that. It actually gave us a 50x improvement, in fact. So it was pretty interesting from that perspective. But it sparked people to think that if you could do these sort of jobs more quickly, you could start to mass produce more. And mass production really started in these early days as people started to mechanize jobs and tasks that people did in their day-to-day lives. Then, you know, railroads came, because once you started mass producing cotton and mass producing cloth, then you had to transport it. It wasn't, you know, everything was subsistence before that. So we had rail networks, we had communication networks that developed out of this. You know, from there, illumination, so Edison and his light bulb and all the other, there was a lot of actually things before Edison around electricity and the theory of it, but it wasn't until he harnessed it into something that people could realize could really change the way people lived, that drove a lot of change and innovation in the market. First airplane flight with the Wright brothers, just put it in there because interestingly, our GDP at that point hadn't really taken off, but we were really starting to innovate, starting to think differently. Like flying in the air was something that Icarus and others dreamed about, but we actually started realizing it this time. And then the programmable computer came in 1945. And note there's a big spike there. This is after the First World War. And then right after that spike, you can see there's a big dip of distraction in the marketplace. That was caused by the first cat pictures being served up by these computers. And we learned very quickly that they were very distracting and not very useful for GDP. So the whole point of this is innovation drives growth, and we're in the midst of super hyper growth. We're at the top of this tail here, and in fact, it's gone up even higher. This is from 2005. And the point I'm making is the first industrial revolution was in this period, the orange period, and it didn't really have a massive impact on GDP and innovation. It wasn't until the second revolution, industrial revolution, came about, and the reason it changed so dramatically was because people started to think differently. In the first industrial revolution, it was isolated pockets of invention. But what happened is that knowledge filtered through the populace, and people started to apply those innovations and those inventions to their own lives and started to innovate in lots of other different areas that really people weren't thinking about innovation at the time. And then from that, of course, the digital revolution was born, the blue area where we're sort of now. And in this period, we sort of scrunched down the amount of development that's occurred over 50 to 70 years into a much smaller period, but it's also the fastest growth period. And what I'm saying now is we're entering into the next phase of this, which is where we start thinking differently about all sorts of services and products and the way we engage as a community. And that's going to fundamentally change the output of the country, but also change our lives quite significantly. And I mentioned the first programmable computer, and this is the ENIAC. And the ENIAC sort of sparked this notion of compute power, the fact that you could actually program things to do things, mathematical calculations at the time. And 70 years ago, this was born, and their big proud statement was, when you turn this thing off, there was a small town in the middle of America somewhere, the lights would go off for like 10 minutes as this thing powered up. And they loved that. They thought it was amazing. And it's impressive because it showed that we started thinking about computers. And between this time and now, 70 years, we've taken that power. We've completely obliterated what we thought what computers really were. And we've got to the point now where we can put really something the size of a coin on our wrist that has infinitely more power, well, not infinitely, but a lot more power than those first computers. And what do we do with it? Well, we use it to figure out where to have drinks with our buddies. Aren't we clever? Look at that. That's development for you. But that was not what really happened in 70 years. What really happened in 70 years is something far more profound. What we did was we created the internet. And the internet has been the source of democratization from day one. And it ties very much into a lot of the themes that I've heard in this conference in the last 2 days. The web democratized information. Open source democratized software. And let's not forget how important that is. That allows us the building blocks to create new value inside an economy that's already blooming. So the way we get that acceleration is through sharing higher and higher value resources to more and more people. And also APIs, for me, are just a layer of, on top of really the open source movement, to take those shared capabilities, those shared resources, and offer them as services, as resources. So what it means is now as a web developer or any kind of application developer, I can easily embed maps into any application. I can get facial recognition software with a few API calls. I can leverage prediction engines and recommendation engines through an API call. It's very powerful. It puts the power of a lot of thinking and then a lot of research into the hands of every single developer. And that for me is really exciting. Now, there's this philosopher and economist called Pierre Levy, who's French, and he made this pretty interesting comment only even a few years ago that no one knows everything, everyone knows something, and all knowledge resides in humanity. And amazingly, since he said that, and that was in 1997, that's really changed to all that knowledge now resides in our network. And this is why I think we're only at the beginning of really understanding how to leverage it, because we've got this critical mass of capability and knowledge that have come together on a free platform, essentially, for us to leverage and build new value and change the way things have been done. So I'm talking about a second digital revolution. So what needs to happen for that to occur? Well, the first thing is the internet. We needed a globalized network that can connect right now about 2.8 billion people and share any kind of information. Anyone can take part in it. You can go and publish a web page tomorrow. It doesn't have to be factual information. You can do whatever you want. But the fact is, it's a free flow of information, unless you're in China or Venezuela recently. But if you're in any other country, it is actually free flow information. Machine-readable APIs are pretty interesting because they turn the notion of what the web was created for, which was the free flow of information for people, and does the same thing for machines. Making something machine-readable through an API is actually extremely transformative because it now allows the billions of devices that are cropping up to communicate on a single plane as well. And those devices typically live in the realm of the physical, and the information they gather is something that can add value to existing data sets that we already own. But for the second digital revolution to occur, smartphones, I think, and location were particularly important because it didn't just put compute power in the pocket. What it also did was help us change the way we behave, change the way we integrate, we work with our suppliers, change our expectation of the type of services that should be available to us. It's funny, when I talk to our enterprise customers and prospects in my company, one of the biggest things they're reacting to is the consumer expectation has changed so much and they just can't keep up with it. And that drives change. Without that, you wouldn't get that change. So it's pretty powerful. And I think what's happened because of this, because we've gotten used to understanding how to deliver digital services, how to engage consumers, how to unlock value that's deep inside one silo somewhere and bring it forward right to the forefront so people can access their policy from an insurance company or make a claim directly there on their phone, means that we've also created this critical mass of open services, data, and devices. And this goes right back to the value of open source, right back to the value of the web, and right back to the value of APIs, is that there's so much available to us right now. There's so much power at the fingertips of any one of you in this room, and millions more outside of this room, that it forces something new to happen. This is where thinking different occurs. And this is why I believe what we're going to see in the next 10 years is a radical increase in the innovation that we've been seeing. And it's because we've got this critical mass of things all occurring at once. So you can think of the first digital revolution as just creating the network, getting everyone connected and sharing information. That in alone was transformational. But the second the second digital revolution is about leveraging the network to democratize everything, to put everything in the hands of individuals. The more you do that, the better value you can derive from it, and actually the more interesting business models are. And I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about that, is what are we seeing today and what's coming in through the pipe. So the first thing to talk about is the share economy. I think we're all familiar with this term, which is rather than owning something, or if you own something, you share it with other people, and there's a logistical exercise behind it so that you can book things, use them, and then give them to someone else. And this has been a long time coming. So, we had rental cars first. That's a sort of a sharing, but you had to buy all the cars. We had Zipcar, which removed the need for having rental offices, and you just did everything through your phone. That was quite transformative. We've got things like Scoot, which is a scooter service that does a similar thing. And if you've been to any city in Europe in the last 3 years, you've probably seen City Bike. City Bike is an initiative that's been adopted by many of the governments to offer free, sustainable, or near-free, sustainable transport inside city centres to reduce congestion. And what it is just banks of bicycles across the city that you can book with your mobile phone and move from one place to another. And it really changes, if you're in a city and you're visiting, that's a great way to go and move around other than trying to figure out more complex ways of doing it. But bizarrely, while this sounds sort of innovative, it isn't. They're really being out-innovated by other new business models very, very quickly and very rapidly. So this is, for me, is still rental plus. It's centralized and it's CapEx intensive because you've got to buy the bikes, you've got to buy the cars, and then you've got to build the services around them to make it work. But the share economy is about not owning the resources, but actually allowing people who own the resources to take part in the transaction. Different way of thinking about it. Very decentralized, very democratizing in an environment. So you've got things like Lyft in San Francisco, which, and you've probably heard about ride sharing from Uber as well, that allow people to use their car to become a taxi service. And it's great because most people have a car, only use it for about 10% of the time. 90% it remains idle and parked. So, and it's the second biggest investment anyone makes in their life on one single item. So why not give people the opportunity, if they have the time, to get more leverage out of that resource? That's pretty cool in itself. Secondly, it's great for me as a consumer because I found it very difficult to find taxis in San Francisco, even though there were 500 yellow cabs and probably 500 other types of taxis. Now I can get from A to B much, much quicker. And the way it is all transpired is Lyft or Uber have just created a network, an application that connects you, the individual, to the other individual that has a resource that you want to use, and they barter that transaction. So it's no longer centralized. It's only centralized in the fact they run that application, but they don't own the data, they don't control who you pick up. You have lots of different options. It's much more decentralized, so they win based on the value of the service they provide, which is exactly how it should be. Airbnb, exactly the same thing. You know, you can rent out your room. Other people want to buy that room. They don't want to spend money on expensive hotels. It serves that other purpose. But interestingly, in San Francisco in particular, I'm seeing a lot of new business models just starting to emerge around this concept that you start sharing things that you own. Everything from logistics networks, you know, for deliveries to even restaurants, like renting out excess capacity. So there's one startup called Sprig that they use restaurants to go and cook ad hoc meals and then deliver them in a localized area of about 1 mile. And what that means is they can do order delivery service of meals, a la carte meals, without owning kitchens, and they can deliver with under 15 minutes. I don't know whether it'll take off or not, but why not try it? Why not play with these things? And that's what democratization of this information really means. It means everyone can play with it and try out new things. Shopping is another one that's been transformed. So, you know, Amazon has taken about as far as it can go with centralized distribution. So Amazon, you know, beat everyone up just by providing the best distribution network and investing as much as the capital they made back into making a great customer experience. But amazingly, they're hitting the wall as well. There's new innovations coming on top of Amazon that Amazon will probably adopt, I believe, and it will disrupt their traditional business. And that's, you know, the to-do list for many enterprises is, first thing to do is disrupt yourself before somebody else does. And Amazon will do that, but others may not. And what we're seeing, again, is these new decentralized distribution mechanisms. There's something called Google Shopping Express in San Francisco and another one called Postmates. And what they do is they don't own the inventory. They don't own the shops. They don't own the distribution centers. What they do is they go and catalog the inventory, or they provide an inventory system, actually, for local businesses. So the nice thing about this model is they sustain local businesses by giving them an online presence and allowing me very quickly, if I need to get, you know, milk and cheese, I can go to the corner store, or if I'm at work, I can literally just order it, and it'll come to my house in 2 hours on someone on a bike. And they barter that transaction. And it doesn't mean Amazon goes away, but it means there's this new level of convenience. But it's not just convenience for the sake of it. It actually sustains the local businesses in that town. So rather than everything being bought from Amazon, increasingly I'm finding myself buying more things in real time from local merchants through things like Google Shopping Express and Postmates. It's very simple, it's very easy, and I've noticed a lot of the companies are buying their snack inventories and things that way as well. Instead of going to Costco, they buy from these other channels. It's pretty interesting. So a lot's being disrupted. And of course, I couldn't really go too far without talking about IoT and the physical web. Because the physical web, or really IoT itself, is decentralizing knowledge. It's enabling us to listen to things with sensors, pick up information that's widely distributed, and build value from that data. And there's a couple of examples I want to highlight here, not because they're necessarily going to change our lives, but I like the way they're thinking. So are you familiar with Tile? You know what Tile is? A few nodding heads. So Tile is like a little tag you can put on your keys or in your bag or in your kids, which I do, which is a little bit weird. But it allows you to track anything. And it makes something that's fairly static but losable, findable again, right? So if I lose my keys, what I can do is I can check on my phone and see the last place I saw it. So when did I lose, when did I part with my keys? That's the first bit of data it gives you. And then the second bit of data it allows you to do is say, well, I've lost my keys. Go and tell everyone else that has tile that I've lost my keys. And then if they're close to my keys and they can pick up the signal, they'll let me know where that thing is. Which is really powerful because it suddenly creates this ad hoc lost and found network when you lose something. And it's not necessarily going to change our lives, but I love the idea that idea just wasn't possible before. You could create these, like low-energy Bluetooth devices and attach them to everything. Also, the other thing down there is Estimote, which uses the iBeacon technology on your mobile phone for hyper-local services. So they have the same sort of device, but you actually install it on a wall anywhere. It can be in a museum, in a shop, somewhere else. And they can give you hyper-local information as you're in the vicinity of that device. So again, they're getting much better at targeting advertising, targeting information when you need it. And the future of all this is really context. Give me the right information at the right time is pretty important because there's too much data. So these sorts of things are helping us figure through how that's going to work. The other thing that's interesting is decentralization of compute power. And you might be thinking, well, didn't we already do that with the phone? Isn't the phone the epitome of decentralized compute power? Well, yeah, but we're very dependent on the phone and it's very distracting. And what we're realizing is if you deliver certain bits of information in different ways, it can be less distracting, but you can still remain connected. So, I've got my Moto 360 here, which I love just on the notification side. What I used to do when I was in a conversation, my phone would beep, and I get it out and I look at it. Well, that destroys any conversation. But now it just beeps, and it's literally like a half a second flash. I can see exactly what it is. I know it's not my wife, ordering something else from Amazon or something like that, and I can relax again. So, just being able to deliver information to different places at different times that when it's most relevant is really important. And what this means, what this watch represents, and what the Intel Edison chip represents is compute power is getting very small, very low powered, and you can almost embed it anywhere. Which means you don't really need this centralized brick in your pocket anymore that's quite distracting. But in essence, if I've got my, my Specsavers glasses on and I've got my watch, do I need my phone anymore? Like, can I get rid of this? When I'm sitting in my car, can I get my compute power from my car? There's new ways of thinking about how we attach but also detach from technology. So what does this mean for the enterprise? Because actually every day, every conversation I have is with CIOs, architects, and VP of applications and infrastructure. And a lot of what their problems seem like, to them at least, are mundane problems, which I can't move fast enough, I can't get the data quick enough, there's too many requests from the business, and I can't keep up. And it might sound mundane when you frame it like that, but what they're really battling with is they're trying to unlock the value of their organization, and they're looking for the best way of doing that. And organizations, traditionally by their very nature, have been institutions. They've been very centralized. And the way they define themselves is through their brand and reputation, through the innovation that they drive within their own four walls, and the networks of relationships they have with business partners and suppliers. That's how companies were brought up. So what does decentralization and democratization mean for enterprises? That's quite a scary concept because they've suddenly got to change quite dramatically. And there's a great quote from Jack Welch, who said something to the form of, when the innovation inside a company is slower than the innovation outside of the company, that marks the end of that company, right? And I think most customers and prospects I speak to are starting to feel that urgency, that they've got to change the way they do things. And for enterprises, the motion is quite simple. The actual mastering is quite difficult. But what you need to do is actually narrow the boundaries of your enterprise, and you've got to start letting people in. And that's scary for people. That's not a natural muscle. But if you look at all those past business models, they're letting everyone in and talking directly with each other. And for the enterprise, the way they do this is usually with APIs. And innovation is probably the first place I tend to have a conversation with our customers about. And I was talking about 2 weeks ago to an insurance company who said, yeah, we have a real innovation problem. How do you find talent? How do you hire smart people that can innovate? And I said, I don't think you have an innovation problem. I think you've probably got very smart people in your organization. What you have is you're starving them. You're giving, data starvation. If they can't access the resources to go and innovate, nothing's going to materialize. So you have to open up, because either you're relying on individuals and business initiatives to drive all the innovation, or you should start unlocking your data and let everyone have a go at it. And that's an unusual concept for many enterprises who used to sort of boxing things in and owning things. And there are ways of doing it, I don't get into it today, but there's ways of doing it that you can remain control, but give people frameworks of freedom within the organization to innovate. And then, of course, once you get good at that, you can start thinking about how do I open up those same channels to my network, to my partners and my suppliers, or even to the public. And when you start doing that, that's when you get the real value, and then suddenly you start to decentralize your value. Your value no longer is locked up in the four walls of your enterprise. It's actually in the network that's created around the APIs, around the resources that you've given people so they can build their own business. And a couple of good examples of this. One is Expedia. So Expedia, many moons ago, decided they're going to build an affiliate network, which isn't unusual. If you've been in companies for many years, affiliate networks have been out there. But they did two things right. One is they decided that whatever they could do, you could do with the affiliate network, through their own website, you should be able to do through affiliate network. So they allow people to embed all their value inside someone else's site, which intrinsically what they meant was they made the leap from, I want everyone coming to my site, so they understand, for brand recognition, and because that's part of my value. I'm going to forego everyone coming to my site and allow people to go to other people's sites and get the same value they get from my site, which is a little bit counterintuitive for most enterprises because they think of brand and reputation owning the customer experience. But by doing that, what they said was there's a much bigger pie out there, and I don't mind having a smaller slice of a much bigger pie. And with their affiliate network, what they managed to do was turn their $2 billion revenue that they make as a company into $4 billion. So half their revenue now goes to the affiliate network. So they've halved the value of the central organization, but they've created an equal, or in my mind, more valuable external organization that's worth a lot more and can drive a lot more innovation. Salesforce did the same thing with their API. They built a CRM application, and they could have stopped there. They did very well just as a CRM company, but what they did is they opened up that data through an API, which they did charge for, which is very smart, I think, for their business model. And now about 47% of all calls to their data goes through the API. And that translates to probably about 40% of their revenue, which is pretty incredible. They're no longer, this is why they call themselves a platform company, they're no longer a CRM company. They don't serve applications as much as they serve data. And all organizations can learn from that. So let's go a bit further ahead. What's happening now? So decentralization of finance. This is pretty interesting because finance is banking is about as old as civilization itself in some ways. The reason we have banks is we need trusted entities to look after things we care about, right? So as a populace, we centralize things so that we could trust things and not worry about every single minute detail. And banks are a great example of an institution that relies heavily on trust to do business. And we've seen some interesting things start to change here. So, in merchant and P2P payments, there's lots of startups enabling this sort of technology now. PayPal's not on here, but PayPal should be there. We've got also microfinancing, and crowdsourced loans. So if you want to get funded on something, even like an idea from Kickstarter, a few years ago, if you wanted to raise $100,000, you need to go and find an angel network and figure it out that way. But now people can. There's other means of getting financial aid from the collective, not just from individuals. And it's a great way to market test. Is my idea good or not? Well, I may as well do a Kickstarter campaign and see if I get interest in it. Because that's a great way of understanding, will people put their money where their mouth is? So by opening up these new financial channels is driving new innovation beyond just changing finance itself. But this doesn't stop here, and this is what I'm pretty excited about, and we got a bit cut off here, but the decentralization of currency is really exciting. And I'll explain why in a minute. Are people familiar with Bitcoin? I'm assuming most people are. Quick show of hands. Okay, yeah, loads of you. Excellent, good. Well, so Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, and it's fundamentally challenging really what we think finance and banking is all about. So they're turning it on its head. So rather than actually, before I even go there, I'm going to give you a little insight onto what it is. So if you don't know what it is, it's a cryptocurrency. So what that means is it's digital. There's no physical representation of this currency. And by its very nature, it's also global, which means there's no foreign exchange fees. There's one index that the currency is measured on. And cryptocurrency basically means that instead of being a physical thing that when I transact with someone, it's a proof of a transaction that's cryptographically protected. And I know it was you, and I know that when the transaction happened because through cryptography. So it's completely digitized the whole transaction system. The nice thing about it, in my mind, obviously free money movement. It's much easier to move money around in Bitcoin. So foreign exchange fees, Western Money Union, all those sort of things. I think I'm going to struggle with this in the next couple of years. Microtransactions are possible. The problem with payment networks is because they're monopolistic and centralized in their very nature, they can charge whatever they want for a transaction. And the transaction fees on credit cards, for example, are so high that it's hard for small merchants to accept credit cards, cash is sort of going away a little bit. So what do we do? Right? There has to be something else. Well, Bitcoin offers very, very small transaction fees, like minute compared to the other providers. And it also means micropayments are possible. So now I can just go into a shop, pay for a banana without having cash. I can just NFC my phone on a tab and pay with Bitcoin. Why not? It's easy. There's no transaction fees. It doesn't hurt the small vendor or the large vendor. It also means rather than magazines where in publishing I can't just buy one article usually because the transaction costs are too high. But I can start doing that now. I can buy content as needed versus buying whole magazines and only reading 3 things. But the most interesting thing about Bitcoin is the blockchain. This is a public ledger of the financial transaction between parties. And this is where banks really are struggling in my mind because their records are opaque and they're secretive and you don't really know what's going through the bank. With blockchain, it's decentralized, so there's no one place where this blockchain is stored. There's probably about 8,000 locations on the internet today where these are stored. And what it means is, because it's open source, it's open on the web, anyone can view those ledgers. You can very quickly see exactly who took part in a transaction and where the value exchange occurred. It's a very different model than banks. Basically it's got rid of trust. And once you get rid of trust and you can really trust cryptographic proof, then a lot of new things can start happening. And I believe what will happen is we won't fully get rid of trust. I think we'll have cryptographic proof as a basis, and then we'll have trust layered on top through institutions. But it fundamentally changes the way we think about how we exchange value between multiple parties, and that's going to be pretty impressive. So I don't have an answer to this one, but when I was doing these slides, I thought to myself, well, if you can change currency, something as fundamental as that a lot of our civilization was built on, then what about identity? What does it mean to properly identify yourself in this new realm? And I don't have the answer to this, but the way we do it today is quite often we delegate to social networks. We centralize our identity management mostly out of convenience, just because I don't want to remember lots of different passwords, and passwords are not a great way anyway, we've realized, of securing services, because anyone only has to hack one centralized database and they get a lot of information about you. So identity is, I think, critical and will change with this notion of the Bitcoin protocol, where I can identify by myself through other ways, through other mechanisms other than just username and password. And it also means that my identity is then not distributed and stored in databases all over the place. And actually, I think that will actually greatly increase security. But I don't know what it looks like yet. So if anyone knows of any good projects that are looking at trying to solve this problem, how to decentralize identity, I know it's happening with storage and some other things, but I'd love to hear if you've got any stories on that one. So I think I'm right on time. So the whole point of this is really, I'm very excited about where we are. I think this second digital revolution is fundamentally changing the way we think about business models, the way we think about collaboration, the way we think about what the open web should be. And this decentralization is super powerful. So with that, my only ask is, just think about what you're going to do with that power. It's very powerful. Okay, thank you.